Wishaw, former steel town on the Clyde Valley. Population 30,000. Pensioners attend a special Sunday service. Afterwards, 87 go to the church hall for a pre-Christmas lunch of steak pie. It's an ordinary scene from an ordinary Scottish community. But as the party disperses, they carry with them the seeds of an agonizing condition. Within days, one of their number will be dead. In 2 months, 8 more will have perished, victims of an invisible killer for which there is no cure. In the next few weeks, the epidemic will spread. By the end, hundreds will fall ill and 20 will die. Tonight, we'll tell you the inside story of what became the most serious outbreak of its kind in the world.
He felt ill, started to suffer from diarrhoea, but not so much that he had to stay in bed. The symptoms weren't severe at that stage.
One of those at the church lunch was 80-year-old Harry Shaw, a church elder. His daughter remembers it began to go wrong on the Wednesday, 3 days after the lunch.
Overnight, his condition deteriorated, and on the Thursday, having had 24 hours of the usual, thinking it was a tummy bug, he had 24 hours of no solids and trying to keep up his fluid intake. When the symptoms had become more severe, on the Thursday we called in his GP.
That same day, another Wishaw resident was displaying alarming symptoms. Margot Petty, a local nurse, was mystified.
I thought, oh, good grief, what is this I've caught? I have never experienced anything like it. I mean, you're sitting there and you cannot move because your legs will not allow you to move. You're so weak. I can understand, more so probably as being a nurse, how it can kill. I've had a family and it's nothing. Having a baby is nothing like that.
Elsewhere in Wishaw, others were falling ill with a mystery bug. Many from the community were being hospitalised, including 2 from the church lunch.
Late in the afternoon, his condition deteriorated and he started passing blood. His GP came in the following morning, which was the Friday, and it was then he decided to have him admitted to hospital. The ambulance men came and took him out of the back door, and he passed his garden, and my mother and I both knew that he was looking for the last time at the garden that he loved. We knew in our hearts that he would never come back.
Microbiologists at Law Hospital were becoming concerned. Tests on patients admitted over the last 3 days showed disturbing similarities. The bacteria were all of the same type, E. coli 0157. It was not good news. There are thousands of benign E. coli bacteria in human stomachs, but 0157 has mutated into a toxic strain. Since its discovery in the early 80s, it's infected 40,000 victims worldwide.
If one was to set out and design a nasty food poisoning bug, you'd come up with E. coli 157, not just because it can attack people and cause very serious damage and maybe even kill them, but it spreads very easily too. We only need to eat perhaps as few as 10 actual bacteria, and millions and millions are needed to cover the head of a pin. You're going to need to eat a very small number to actually get infected and perhaps develop all these nasty consequences.
The microbiologist's first task was to alert the man in charge of the region's public health. He was Dr. Syed Ahmed, a consultant who'd been with Lanarkshire Health Board for 4 years. He was to play a pivotal role in the unfolding drama. Dr. Ahmed immediately contacted local hospitals and GPs. There were a total of 15 cases. An epidemic was starting. His first step was to get the food histories from the confirmed and possible hospital cases. What the patients had eaten or drunk in the past week would yield clues to the outbreak's source. Ahmed had to move fast. Half the day was already over. By the end of the afternoon, a total of 9 patients had been contacted. Residents in Wishaw were unaware of the crisis brewing around them.
Will we try another piece of food? Hold on, she's coming this time. Right, you get her carefully.
Jennifer Snodgrass was 6 years old that November. Her mother remembers the day she went to her grandmother's for lunch. The sandwich meat came from a local butcher's.
On Friday, 22nd of November, my mum bought cold meat in Wishaw, and that was at 10 minutes to 12 on the Friday, and at 20 past 12 Jennifer had sandwiches on the cold meat for her lunch, and she had the sandwiches and returned back to school. Everything was fine.
Meanwhile, Dr. Ahmed sifted through the food questionnaires looking for anything to link the 9 cases. One factor emerged instantly. 7 said they'd eaten cooked meats originating from the town's biggest butchers. That same shop had also supplied the steak pie which Harry Shaw had eaten at the church lunch on Sunday. The finger of suspicion pointed unwaveringly to a shop called John Barr's. Not hard proof, but it demanded urgent action. Graham Bryceland, a senior environmental health officer, was the man Dr. Ahmed now turned to. Together, they would be responsible for stemming the epidemic. They agreed to meet to discuss tactics. Neither the Health Board nor Lanarkshire Council have agreed to be interviewed. However, we've obtained a detailed set of minutes plus confidential documents which reveal how they handled the outbreak as it happened. Combining eyewitness accounts and courtroom testimony, we've managed to reconstruct the salient facts of this and future meetings. The priority was to get the contaminated meat out of the food chain. Their powers were great. They could ask Barr to voluntarily stop selling the cooked meats, they could seize the meat or force him to shut up shop. Closure would be most certain, but the team had to balance public safety with lawful trade. In 1995, Dr. Ahmed and others came unstuck in the Lanark Blue case. A neighbouring council had gone for safety first and ordered a farmer not to sell his cheese for fear it had listeria. But the farmer was awarded substantial compensation after proving the cheese wasn't dangerous.
Do you think that the financial considerations which accrued from this specific Lanarkshire Blue court case would have been in the minds of Graham Bryceland and Dr. Syed Ahmed?
Well, I don't know what was in their minds on the night, but I would be surprised if it didn't cross their minds at some moment when they were thinking about the implications of this particular case. There is always this very difficult balance to be struck between the public health interest and perhaps the interests of your employer. You don't want to take an action which leads to your employer being sued for vast sums of money.
The health team resolved to ask Barr to stop selling the cooked meats voluntarily. But to get his cooperation meant contacting him tonight, before the shop opened for a busy Saturday. Bryceland swung by the premises to see what he was dealing with. From the exterior, there was little to suggest anything of the possible dangers lurking within. Two hours later at 9 p.m, Bryceland arrived with his colleagues at John Barr's house. For the three, it's a tense moment. Much will hinge on the butcher's reaction. If he doesn't comply, they'll have to take court action to force him to close down. But the drama swiftly recedes. No one's at home. They decide to wait for his return.
When we came back into the driveway, there were 3 gentlemen standing at the door. At that particular time, I hadn't the foggiest who they were. When they came up to the door, they introduced who they were and I invited them into the house.
Until now, John Barr has never talked about what happened that night or throughout the outbreak. Inside, the team explained that E. coli could be in his cooked meats. The butcher agreed to withdraw them.
Were you quite clear in your mind what they meant when they said cooked meats?
Yes. I was quite clear that we would undertaking from Saturday on we would not sell any cooked meats.
What about other foodstuffs? Did you ask about those?
I think I asked about the likes of pies, breadies, steak pies, that sort of stuff, the bakery line. And they said yes, it'd be okay for to sell that stuff on Saturday.
Barr's question was vital. He sold all kinds of food, from meats to bread and pastries. The butcher knew that some of his pies, like the steak ones, contained cooked meats as well. Dr. Ahmed's advice was to prove controversial. He said Barr could carry on selling his pies as long as they were baked fresh on Saturday. It was just the cold, cooked meats on their own that had to be withdrawn. The environmental health officer who later advised Barr found this odd due to the risk of cross-contamination.
It's surprising that they made that decision to distinguish between cooked meat products and cooked meats themselves, and the risk of contamination would be the same for both.
Why?
Because once a product has been cooked, it's then potentially going to be eaten without further processing or cooking, and that means that if any contamination has occurred, then the public could be at risk.
But Dr. Ahmed was well versed in outbreak procedure. He'd just contributed to a government paper on prevention of foodborne diseases. Significantly, the document makes clear that a team visit the premises whenever practicable. One of the outbreaks the paper used as an example was E. coli.
Did they ask to look at your premises?
On the Friday night? No, no. Which I was quite surprised at, actually. I thought maybe they went down there immediately. But they said they'd send 2 inspectors up the following Saturday morning.
As the health team left, they might well have felt pleased with Barr's positive response. At dawn the next morning, 2 environmental health officers arrived to start taking samples of cooked meat and swab surfaces. The bulk of the meat would go to Aberdeen for E. coli testing. There was much to do. The shop was larger than they'd thought. 38 staff were employed, and on a good week the firm could shift 700-odd pounds of cooked meats.
On the Saturday, you were trying to make sure that the staff were getting through to the customers, that there was a food scare, and we were handling it properly by telling them that we weren't selling any cooked meat until we got to the bottom of whatever the food poisoning thing was.
But cooked meats were about to leave by the back entrance. David Moon was on his way to pick up 300 slices of turkey, ham and roast beef for his niece. She wanted it for her daughter's 18th birthday party. John Barr's precise role in the events that followed were to be disputed.
On Saturday morning, I went to collect it at 9 o'clock as arranged. I got it and I paid him the money.
Who did you pay the money to?
Mr. Barr.
Himself?
Yes, and he said he would get somebody to bring out the order. He got a young boy to carry the stuff out because it had been in a chill, and the young boy came out and put it in my boot.
By the time he got to his niece, she greeted him with disturbing news.
On the Saturday morning of the party, we had a phone call from a relative saying that John Barr had cleared all the cold meat from his shelves in the shop. Did we know about it? And I said, no, but we'll ask Uncle Davy when he delivers the meat, which he did just shortly afterwards, minutes afterwards. And he was unaware of this. He says, however, I'll phone Mr. Barr and check with him, which he did.
I said to him that I was phoning on behalf of my niece, that she had heard in the wireless that there's something going about and his shop's been mentioned on the wireless. And can you tell me anything about it? And he says, no, it's all right. It's only chopped ham and pork and something else that is affected, and nothing at all to do with yours at all.
In my way of thinking, if there was a scare about any meat, the powers that be, i.e. the environmental health, had obviously been in there and checked everything out, discarded anything that was unsuitable, and anything sold afterwards should have been okay. Plus, Mr. Barr, Butcher of the Year, excellent reputation. It did reassure us.
I opened up 1 or 2 parcels, got some tongs, and I sampled the meat. I said to Faye, it may be just a tummy bug or something like that.
Mr. Barr wouldn't speak to us about the McFarlane meat, which later became the subject of a court case. But we do know 2 things. Mr. Barr has said he can't remember the morning phone call from Mr. Moon, and later on Saturday evening, by which time Moon had left his house, Barr had tried to contact him twice.
People say there was confusion in the shop on the Saturday, and this was why Mr. Barr let out this large order to David Moon for the Cascade 18th birthday party. Does that really wash?
I think it's very possible that there was confusion there. If you imagine somebody who's running a fairly large-scale business, very busy, Saturday's the busiest time, running up to Christmas, and then suddenly he's told that he might be responsible for causing food poisoning and that meats have to be removed immediately. So he's still trying to keep his business open, and at the same time he's got environmental health officers taking swabs with rubber gloves on and generally making him quite concerned and worried.
That was one of these sort of horrendous days. You wouldn't like to have another day like it. I mean, the staff take a great pride in their job, sort of thing, and I think this indented their pride a bit. They're feeling just everybody sort of stunned about it. And disbelief, sort of thing.
Oblivious to this breach of the voluntary agreement, the authorities were embarking on the first outbreak control meeting. There were to be over 30 more before the crisis averted. It was from here that the key decisions in handling the epidemic would be made. The meeting heard that 11 more patients, in addition to the 18 already inside, were waiting for hospital admission. The news got worse. It transpired Barr had supplied 30 pounds of steak for the church lunch the previous Sunday. Residues were on their way for testing. After the meeting, Dr. Ahmed went to the shop for the first time. Officers who'd been there earlier reported the potential for cross-contamination between the cooked meats and other foods. What he saw convinced Ahmed to add to his earlier advice. The doctor told Barr to stop selling mincemeat products, pies and all sandwiches, as well as disinfect his surfaces. However, we've seen evidence showing for the first time that his new instructions came too late for some. According to Dr. Ahmed's own confidential report, 11 people who fell ill reported buying contaminated products from the shop on Saturday. 4 bought meat pies and pastries. The report adds that later interviews produced discrepancies.
We are looking at it in hindsight, so you don't want to be too harsh on the judgment of them. But I think it was a fundamental mistake to allow the cooked, baked meat products to go on sale. Really showed a lack of understanding of the risks of cross-contamination in the building.
But you might expect the public health consultant to know about E. coli and its properties.
Oh yes, I would expect public health consultants to know about E. coli. Yes. One has to conclude that he thought that the measures that had been taken very early in the outbreak would be sufficient to stop any more infected meat reaching the general public.
He was wrong, wasn't he?
As it turned out, yes, the situation was more complex than it appeared at first sight.
In a separate and equally significant development, we've unearthed claims that cooked meats may also have been sold over the counter on that Saturday. Margot Petty recalls the moment.
Every Thursday and Saturday, I do go into Mr. Barr's, the butcher's, and the baker next door. So that Saturday I went in as normal. I bought 2 cold meats. I'm sure it was roast beef, tongue, and everything seemed normal.
We've heard from various sources that 4 people perhaps did buy cooked meat on that day. Do you think that's possible?
No, total impossibility. There were no cooked meat sold in the Saturday morning at all.
None on the counter?
None at all. It was all taken out of the cold rooms even before the staff came in. So we had absolutely no chance of people getting cooked meat on the Saturday.
So they must be mistaken?
I would think so, yes.
But are you certain that you did buy cold meat on that Saturday?
I definitely bought cold meat that Saturday. And nobody can say I didn't, because I definitely did buy that cold meat. I was feeling rotten, by the way. I wasn't feeling too well that Saturday, but I bought it.
If you were feeling ill, might that have affected your memory?
No, not when it comes to that, no.
One matter that is beyond dispute is the fact that Margot Petty did indeed go into John Barr's shop on Saturday. We've talked to the journalist who took these photographs, and he confirms they were taken on that day. These documents add weight to Margot's story. In Dr. Ahmed's report, 4 people, Margot included, are cited as having bought cooked meats on Saturday, which later led to them falling ill. An outbreak minute on December 9th shows this significant fact was brought to the team's notice. The 4 were telephoned and stuck by their dates. It was only later that further questioning showed they couldn't categorically prove they'd bought the meats on that day. The one thing that could prove Margot Petty and the others correct are the till receipts from the shop that Saturday. If they exist anywhere, they're most likely to be here at North Lanarkshire Council, where officers are preparing evidence for next week's fatal accident inquiry into the E. coli deaths. But when we asked them, they replied it would be inappropriate to comment at this stage. If, as we believe, the till receipts no longer exist, it's going to be a tough call for the inquiry to decide whether the witnesses were mistaken or whether, during the confusion of that Saturday, some cooked meats were sold. The size of Barr's business had taken officials by surprise. The shop had been selling contaminated meat for more than a week now, and it was spreading outside the confines of Lanarkshire Council to Bonnie Bridge, 30 miles away. Bankview Nursing Home for the Elderly. On this Saturday morning, their weekend shopping had run into a hitch. Their regular butchers had forgotten to deliver their meat, so a staff member was dispatched to the local Scottmid supermarket. What she didn't know was that, unlike her usual butchers, Scottmid had been supplied by John Barr.
Our catering manager went down to the local Scottmid store and bought 5 separate half-pounds of cooked meats. The sandwiches were made up in the afternoon for the early evening meal for the residents, and then of course staff can have sandwiches as well. So the cooked meats were used up between the Saturday late afternoon, early evening and the Sunday morning.
Back in Wishaw, the Bush Telegraph was bringing in more bad news about the meat. Just before leaving for the party at the Cascade nightclub, Faye McFarlane had been rung by another relative who'd been told by a nurse at Law Hospital that Barr's meat was suspect. Alarmed, Faye rang the hospital.
The lady who answered the phone said the press officer was out of the building at that time. I said, well, can you help me? And explained predicament I was in. And explained how we had been reassured from Mr. Barr in the morning that anything he subsequently sold was okay. And she said to go ahead and have a great party. And just to convince myself and my husband, I got him to overhear me repeating to the lady, you're saying that we're going ahead with this party for 106 people and you're telling me to go ahead and have a great party. Yes, that was fine. We put the phone down and left for the venue.
We had the DJ there, people were up dancing. Later on, we got the birthday cake out, presented that to Lauren, let her blow out her candles and cut the cake. And then about 10 o'clock we said, well, we'll open up the buffet and let people enjoy the buffet. Everybody, as far as I know, ate from the buffet.
Beautiful daughter.
And Lauren's
I'm looking a wee bit worried there, maybe that was an
If anyone had taken precautions over the meat, it was the McFarlane family. The hospital later apologised to Faye for giving her the wrong information. Yet, in the days to come, 13 of the guests would fall ill, one man so seriously that he now has to endure a colostomy bag.
Certainly I've been in situations before which have not been as serious, where we, as enforcement officers, took much stronger control to the extent of having policemen guarding skips while food was being put into it, to dyeing the food to make sure that it couldn't go back into the food chain. And certainly most environmental health officers will know that there are procedures which can be taken to absolutely be sure the food does not go back into the food chain.
At the end of the first full day of the outbreak, the voluntary approach was presenting clear dangers. Despite Mr. Barr's cooperation, up to 24 people contracted E. coli after buying food from the shop, the bulk of which was cooked meats. Whatever the reasons, it is an inescapable fact that none of them would have fallen ill had the shop been closed down on Friday evening.
BBC News at midnight. People in North Lanarkshire have been warned to look out for symptoms of food poisoning after an outbreak in the Wishaw area. 20 people are in hospital, 5 are giving doctors. Two days after she'd eaten a lunch of roast beef sandwiches, little Jennifer Snodgrass was beginning to feel poorly.
On the Sunday morning, Jennifer She didn't look herself. She was a bit pale. She wasn't wanting any breakfast. She had a sore tummy.
But when they went over to Jennifer's grandmother's house and saw what the press was saying, alarm bells began to sound.
My mum had read it in the Sunday papers that a lot of people had bought meat from Bar's shop and Beaky Mill. So we started to panic then, because we knew that a lot of us had eaten out the shop. We didn't know then that it was the roast beef or whatever. We just knew then that we all had something to eat from the shop on the Friday.
Over at Bankview, staff ate the leftovers from the sandwiches of the day before. 16 of them were to fall prey to E. coli. In the Falkirk region where the home was situated, 118 were eventually to fall ill. The horse may have bolted, but the shop's stable door was now being slammed shut. The premises were scrubbed spotless.
As of today, 12 o'clock, we had 68 people presented to us with diarrheal symptoms. Of those, 16 have been confirmed as E. coli 157.
By Monday, the story had become big news. The health team's first press conference played to a national media gallery. Meanwhile, on the real front line, the two local hospitals were already being stretched. Extra staff were drafted in to cope with a massive volume of work. Apart from treating obviously ill patients, doctors had to check and recheck the blood of anyone with E. coli-like symptoms. Even after they'd recovered, testing would continue until patients produced 3 clear samples. The local GP clinic was equally hard-pressed. Nearly 1,000 people would come here before the end of the outbreak. For the community, it was a harrowing time.
It was absolutely filled to capacity, and I mean filled to capacity. And one looked no more ill than the other, but it was the children I felt for. They were so pale, and then you would get the odd one having to be taken out because they wanted to be sick. The kids were just lying there, moaning. It was like to me, it was like something that I'd never experienced. Watching this, it was as if there was a war on or something.
We went to the health centre in the afternoon, and there was blood in Jennifer's sample. When I took the sample back in, I told them, there's blood in it. I know Jennifer's got it. They told me to calm down, don't panic. I was crying, and everyone was looking, wondering what was happening.
By Monday evening, Jennifer was becoming much iller. The doctor came, took one look at the child and booked a hospital bed.
On the road to Monklands Hospital, she could hardly go for 10 minutes without terrible the cramps, and it was really all the crying, and I'm sitting in the back really cuddling her in, and she was screaming with pain, and I could see my dad's face. It must have been difficult for him to drive the car and get there, so you have to stop again, we have to go to the toilet here. And then when we got to the hospital, they told us we had to go to infectious diseases, and then we really started to worry. At least the first 24 hours, Jennifer was in and out the toilet, in and out. And then, because she wasn't drinking anything, they had to come and put a drip in Jennifer. I think this got put in through the night, between Monday night and Tuesday, and Jennifer was petrified of needles. They'd put a needle in the back of her arm, and they couldn't find any veins. With children, they didn't have very good veins. They kept trying, and oh. I kept on thinking that we might even lose her. That's what was starting to get through my mind. Because I don't know what to do without.
Early the next morning, 5 days after the E. coli was first detected, the disease claimed its first fatality.
It was just a case of deterioration. He got weaker and weaker, and by the Monday he had lost consciousness really, and he died in early Tuesday morning, about 7:15. My father was the first to die. Other people took a lot longer to die.
The World at One. This is James Cox with 40 minutes of news and comment. The headlines. A short while ago, the Lanarkshire Health Board announced that a third pensioner has died this morning as a result of the food poisoning outbreak in Wishaw. More than 100 people have complained of symptoms of food poisoning. In some cases...
I think you're taking it personally. You were devastated personally. So looking from that point of view, and just again, just the fact that that was sort of it. Somebody has died here, then I think that was the main reason for closing the company down. You just couldn't take the chance, just in case it was us. It's hard to describe the sort of feeling that goes through your mind. The stigma attached to it, you feel that you've let people down, you've let your customers down, you've let your family down, you've let your staff down, and that all goes through your mind.
With Bar closed, public and political focus now switched to other possible sources of infection. Local MPs were making angry noises. It had been 5 days since officers first interviewed the butcher, and still the public had not been told which other shops he supplied.
My concern is that the rights of producers and profits are being put above public health, public information and public interest, and I think that's quite a wrong set of priorities.
Later that night, against a backdrop of continuing illness, the outbreak team finally decided to publish the names of bar-supplied outlets. At 9:30, a list of 56 shops was given to the press. The health team cannot have been prepared for the way the media handled the release of the list. The questioning was critical.
When did John Barr first provide a list?
He provided the list to us on Saturday afternoon.
Why could that list not have been released on Saturday or Sunday?
The information we were getting from John Barr's was incomplete, so we didn't by any means have a certain list. And that's why we wanted time to check the list and visit the premises and phone the outlets.
The reason for the lack of certainty was that officers had underestimated both the size of Barr's business and the diversity of products he supplied. The more they asked, the more outlets they discovered. The butcher, on the other hand, thinks he was clear.
They got exactly what they asked for, and possibly more than that. What we asked for on the Saturday, I'm sure, was the likes of any customer you supplied wholesale to. They got all that on the Saturday, and then, as I say, it was on Monday when they came back for anybody who got bakery goods, or even household goods that would cook meats or anything like that in them.
The issue of the list became so heated because the press thought that many people might have been prevented from eating bad meat if they'd been warned in advance not to visit certain shops. In fact, we now know that by Saturday night, arguably the earliest they might have published the list, most bar-supplied shops had stopped selling his meat.
In some senses, the health team were lucky. There could easily have been many people with meat in their fridge for whom a warning in the form of a list might have proved helpful. The truth is, the health team had their hands tied. They were forbidden by law to publish any list unless they knew it to be full and complete. Professor Pennington, who later wrote a report on the Wishaw outbreak for the government, believes there remain serious question marks about the validity of some food safety laws in the fast-moving world of E. coli.
When one's considering an organism like E. coli, remember that many of the rules and regulations have been assembled on the basis of old-fashioned types of food poisoning, where there really isn't a major risk to life and limb, as it were, that really one's talking about preventing illness rather than death. E. coli is a different kettle of fish, and we clearly have to react to it in a much more vigorous way than we have to the traditional food poisoning organisms.
A week after it was first identified, the bacteria was cutting a swathe through the community. By Friday, 5 people had died. It would get worse. By the end of the outbreak, another 15 people would die and a total of 500 fall ill, making the Wishaw E. coli outbreak the most serious in the world. All age groups suffered, but it was the elderly who paid the biggest price. Among the dead were 6 from the Bankview home and 8 from the pensioners' church lunch. Today in Wishaw and its surrounds, the legacy continues. Many will suffer lifelong problems, but for some there's been a happy ending.
On the day that she got allowed home and we went to my dad's work, we just walked up the showroom and my dad seen us And Jennifer just ran up and she was cuddling him, and everybody there knew that Jennifer had been ill. And, oh, you look great, you look fine for someone who's just been in hospital, and how are you? And we went outside and seen my brother then, and he was in tears. They were cuddling each other and just so happy.
For the man at the centre of the storm, it's been a long haul. John Bars faced 2 court cases. The first for recklessly and culpably supplying contaminated meats to the McFarlanes. Despite months of preparation, the case fell due to lack of corroboration. At the second case, John Barr and son were fined £2,250 for bad hygiene and supplying E. coli-ridden meat. John Barr reopened his shop after 3 months of closure. Business is down, but many in the community who are not directly affected by the E. coli have warmly received him back into the fold. As for the butcher himself, he remains convinced that he was not the only source of E. coli in his town.
My theory in that is that actually there's other companies out there that's involved in this possibly.
So in terms of the outbreak as a whole, there were people falling ill, in your view, who ate meat which had nothing to do with being supplied by you?
Yeah, well, that's my opinion on it, yes. That's how I read into the matter.
Are you saying that there was no E. coli from your shop at all?
I can't honestly say there wasn't E. coli, and again, I can't honestly say there was E. coli.
Looking back now, with hindsight, do you think that you could have done anything differently?
Myself, personally, no, I don't think. We did what was asked of us. And even thinking back, I don't think, apart from shutting the shop on the flat Friday night, I don't think there's anything else we could have done.
Could the butcher have done more? Next week's inquiry here in Motherwell should answer John Barr's doubts as it seeks to establish how 20 people came to die. Where the E. coli originally came from, no one yet knows. But an internal report we've seen concludes his shop was the sole source of the outbreak. What will present the inquiry with a tougher problem is the way the health team managed the crisis. Once they'd identified E. coli, could stronger action earlier have prevented more illness? But one wider issue may well be beyond the inquiry's remit. The question is, how do we maintain public food safety in a competitive business world? It's a balance that's constantly shifting. Food bugs move faster and are potentially more lethal than ever before, but have the laws designed to help us moved at the same pace? With E. coli coming at us in ever greater numbers, it must be a compelling question for us all.